The Bible describes people before the flood as having extraordinarily long lifespans. In Genesis chapter 5, for example, we see that Adam, the first man, lived 930 years, and his son Seth lived 912 years. Enoch lived 905 years, Kenan 910, and so on. The longest living human mentioned in the book of Genesis was Methuselah, who lived 969 years. Shortly thereafter, the flood swept over the earth, and lifespans decreased according to the Bible. However, the ages attributed to these people in Genesis chapter 10 were still extraordinary. Shem, Noah's son, lived for 600 years. His son, Arphaxad, lived for 438 years. Shelah lived 433 years, and so on. While it may seem bizarre that the Bible would attribute such long lives to early humanity, this type of story is by no means unique in the ancient Near East. An example of a composition that tells of the extremely long lives of early humans is a Sumerian text known as the Sumerian King List. The earliest copy extant that we have comes from the Ur III period. So if you've been following along in our history overview, that's roughly 2100 to 2000 BCE. And our other copies come from the Old Babylonian period, so between 2000 and 1595 BCE. There are a lot of similarities between the biblical genealogies in Genesis 5 and 10 and those that are found in the Sumerian King List. For example, the very long lives or reigns of the people involved. They're very formulaic, so the typical biblical line that's repeated over and over again, and so lived X number of years, and he bore a son. After he bore that son, the person lived X number of years and bore sons and daughters. And all the days of that person were X number of years, and he died. So that is repeated over and over again. In the Sumerian King List, you see something similar as far as repetition is concerned. Then a certain city was defeated, and kingship was taken to another city. In that city, so-and-so ruled for X number of years. Another person ruled for X number of years. And then after a long list of those, it says, this many kings, they ruled for X number of years. Then that city was defeated, and the kingship was taken to another city. And those formulae are repeated. There are also additional notes that are placed in the biblical text and in the Sumerian King List, so they're similar in that way as well. So, for example, since we see this pattern over and over again, these little additions that are added stand out. So, for example, in the Bible in Genesis 5:22, and Enoch lived 65 years, and he bore Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God for 300 years after he bore Methuselah, and he bore sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, because God took him. So it's a little explanatory section there, a tradition that's added into those repetitive formulae. Well, the Sumerian King List does much the same thing. So the text says, then kingship was taken to Kish, the kingship was in Kish, and Etana, the shepherd, who ascended to heaven and consolidated all the foreign countries, became king. He ruled for 1,500 years. So again, that formula of this person ruled this number of years, this person ruled this number of years, and so on, is broken up by these little explanatory notes. Now, the difference between the genealogies of Genesis and the long reigns that are mentioned in the Sumerian King List, the Sumerian King List focuses on kingship, and that kingship descended from heaven. So, after kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, and it moved from Eridu to Batabira, Larsa, Sippar, Shurpak. These are all cities in Sumer, and other cities. So after Shurpak, then the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over and the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. So again, you see this this pattern of long reigns or long lives. Then the flood sweeps over in both texts, right? Both in the Bible and in the Sumerian king list. But after the flood swept over, the kingship was descended from heaven and was in Kish. Then it moves to Uruk, then to Ur, then to Awan, then to Kish again, then to Hamazi, then back to Uruk, then back to Ur, and so forth. So the Sumerian king list shows, by divine decree, which city had the right to rule Mesopotamia at any given time. Because power could shift very easily in the region, the change of rule was seen as a divine decision of the gods. And this sort of thing is explained in a text, one of several, but this one is very specific, the lament over the destruction of Sumer and Ur. So Nana, or Suen, is the god, the moon god that's in charge, that is in Ur, that's over the city of Ur. And the text talks about the destruction of the city of Ur. So the text says, Suen wept to his father Enlil, O father who begot me, why have you turned away from my city which was built for you? There's some other laments, and then Enlil responds to Nana, my son, why do you concern yourself with crying? The judgment uttered by the assembly of the gods, cannot be reversed. The word of An and Enlil knows no overturning. Ur was indeed given kingship, but it was not given an eternal reign. From time immemorial, since the land was founded until people multiplied, who has ever seen a reign of kingship that would take precedence forever? The reign of its kingship had been long indeed, but had to exhaust itself. O my Nana, do not exert yourself in vain. Abandon your city. So, the Sumerian king list is a theological text, making sense of the instability in the region, attributing it to the will of the gods. When we approach the biblical text, then, it would serve us well to attempt to understand the purpose of the text and to determine what the text is doing, what point it's trying to make.